Hey everybody, welcome back to day 2 of the Core Set 2019 set reviews on the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and today we're going to be taking a look at all of the blue cards from, of course, a limited perspective, not from Brawl or Canadian Highlander or Tiny Leaders or Frontier or any other weird formats like Standard or Legacy. We're talking purely about Draft and Sealed. Now, of course, these are my opinions. These are how I'm going to approach the cards on day 1. That might change over time, and I want to hear your opinions down in the comments below and talk amongst each other. It's always great when there's a conversation going down there. But let's jump on into the first card. Up first in blue is Aether Tunnel. Aether Tunnel is 1 and a blue for an enchantment aura at uncommon. It says enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked. This is probably just going to be fine. It's a card that I'm going to lose to. It's one of those cards that's really high risk, high reward. If you slam this on a 7/7 and your opponent doesn't answer it, they're dead in a couple of turns. If they answer it, you're down 2 cards. So it's very high risk, very high reward. It's the kind of card I honestly hate playing against, and I'm never a fan of playing, but there are just some drafts, there's just some sealed pools where this is the only way you're going to win, and if it's your day, you might just, undefeated the entire tournament. So Aether Tunnel ultimately is going to be like, I think it's just a C. I don't think it goes into decks with little creatures. I think this is probably going to be most at home in green with some big beefy creatures where this is going to be very high reward. So I'm going to keep an eye on this. I'm going to put it at a C. I think it could go down to C-. I think it could go up to C+, but C- for Aether Tunnel. Up next is Anticipate. Anticipate is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. Anticipate is always totally fine. I always like it. It's a great turn 2 play in a slower blue deck to dig through some cards. It's never a high pick, but I'll often play the first one, so it's a straight C for me. Not quite a C+, and certainly not a C-. Up next is Aven Windmage. Aven Windmage is 2 and a blue for a creature bird wizard at common. It's a 2/2 flyer. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Aven Windmage gets +1/+1 until end of turn. That, of course, is basically prowess, but not quite prowess because it doesn't count all non-creature spells. Blue-red spells is back on the menu. We're going to see a whole bunch of cards that really strongly point towards blue-red spells being the blue-red deck. And it's one of my favorite archetypes in Draft. If there's a draft format where it exists, I love drafting it. A 2/2 flyer that gets bigger for each Anticipate or Burn spell or etc. that you cast is great, even if it's not a counter and it's just until end of turn. Playable in basically every blue deck, period, and great in the spells deck. So a C+ for Aven Windmage. Up next is Aviation Pioneer. Aviation Pioneer is 2 and a blue for a 1/2 creature human artificer at common. When Aviation Pioneer enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token. Now, as we talked about, there does appear to be a blue, not red, as artifacts often are blue-red, but much more in the Dominaria sense of things. We have a blue-white artifact deck this time around, and Aviation Pioneer is going to be a great include there. Getting a chump blocker, the 1/2, plus an artifact, plus that artifact happens to be a 1/1 flyer that'll hopefully get in for some damage. That's a nice little package right there. Outside of the Artifacts Matter deck, this gets a little less good. It's basically a blue version of Seller of Songbirds from Ravnica, which was kind of mediocre, and there was even a mechanic to copy tokens in that set. So this is like a C-, I think, in most decks, but in that blue-white Artifacts deck, it's going to be much more like a C+, because that Thopter's really going to count for something. Up next is Bone to Ash. Bone to Ash is 2 blue for an instant at uncommon. Counter target creature spell, draw a card. I'm not a huge fan of Cancel, and surprise, it's a set of magic cards, so we're going to talk about Cancel next. I don't like Cancel because it costs 3 mana. It's hard to keep up. It's expensive. Counter spells aren't that great. So Bone to Ash is actually okay, even though it costs 4, even though it's 2 blue. The fact that you draw a card off of Bone to Ash is huge. If there's a controlling deck, preferably blue-black, which it looks like there's going to attempt to be. Whether it's good or not, we'll see. I think Bone to Ash is going to be very, very, very at home there. I think it could also work in the blue-red spells deck. Bone to Ash is just a decent counterspell. It's one that I am usually happy to play. Obviously, if you're going to be aggressive, if your plan is to turn creatures sideways, you're not touching Bone to Ash. But if you're looking to go a little bit late game, play a little bit of tempo, play a little bit of control, then Bone to Ash is fine. In those decks, I think it's like a C+. In other decks, it's still going to be just like any other counterspell, basically a D+. Cancel is up next. Cancel is 1 blue for an instant at common. It says counter target spell, and it's in every set ever. Just like every set ever. No, absolutely not. Sealed, perhaps. Play one if you have to, but otherwise don't. It's just so hard to keep up that mana. It's very telegraphed. It's way too reactive. Counter spells are great in constructed, but in limited, they lose a lot of their luster. They need to be cheap. And this is not cheap. 1 blue is a very real cost. So D+ for cancel. Bit more playable in sealed just because you have less playables, just because people are playing bigger mana stuff, so you can actually hold this up later in the game. But in draft, D+. Up next is Departed Deckhand. Departed Deckhand is 1 and a blue for a creature spirit pirate at uncommon. She's a 2/2. When Departed Deckhand becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it. Departed Deckhand can't be blocked except by spirits. 3 and a blue, another target creature you control can't be blocked this turn except by spirits. So it's a 2/2 for 2, which is fine, of course. That's a bear. It's a bear with a downside, though. If it gets targeted by a spell, but not even by an ability, it has to be by a spell, then you have to sacrifice the deckhand. But it's got some upsides. It's a 2/2 that's generally unblockable. There are spirits in this set, but there aren't that many, really. So this is going to be unblockable a fair bit of the time for just 2 mana. And if it sticks around, making something else probably unblockable is huge. Your opponent's going to have to use a spell on this, likely removal, which kills it anyways. Your opponent's not going to use a combat trick on this to kill it. They might if they're desperate, but they would probably kill this with a removal spell, which kills it by being targeted, so it literally doesn't matter. This is a high pick for me. It's not quite bomb territory. It is just a 2/2, but it's going to soften your opponent up really, really, really well. I really like Departed Deckhand. I've got it at a solid B. Up next is Disperse. Disperse is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. I love Disperse. It's 1 more mana than on summon, sure, but you can somewhat corner case hit auras or enchantments or artifacts or something else that may be of some use that you want it to get rid of. Relatively high pick for me. I'll always play these multiples if I can. The fact that blue-red spells exists makes these even better. So Disperse is a B- for me. I love bounce effects. Always have. Always will. Up next is Divination. Divination is 2 and a blue for a sorcery at common. Draw 2 cards with the objectively best Divination art ever, the one from Theros. Yeah, it's always a good test of a format. If Divination's good, it's because the format's usually a little bit slow. You can spend a turn paying 3 mana to draw 2 cards. Card advantage is huge. And they're typically formats that I love. But there are formats, limited formats, where Divination is awful. Amonkhet, Divination, I can't remember if it was in there, but it would have been horrible in Amonkhet. So really, this is a card that I'm going to look at, and I'm going to see if it's good or not. If it's good, it's a slow format. It's a format I'll probably like. If it's not, it's a fast format. It's a format I probably won't like. So I'm going to optimistically put this at a C+. I'm going to hope that it's not a C-. Up next is Djinn of Wishes. Djinn of Wishes is 3 blue for a creature Djinn at rare. It's a 4/4 flyer. Djinn of Wishes enters the battlefield with 3 wish counters on it. Pay 2 blue and take a wish counter off of it. Reveal the top card of your library. You may play that card. Play meaning if it's a land, you can play it rather than cast, without paying its mana cost. If you don't, exile it. Djinn of Wishes is great. At worst, it's a 4/4 flyer for 5, which is a pretty high pick anyways. We talked about Herald of Faith yesterday. We talked about Sarah Angel several times. Then, if you have the mana, 3 times you get to roll the dice and see if you can hit a decent card on top of your library and cast it for quote-unquote free, by which I mean, of course, 3 blue. Randomness, of course, isn't great, but when it's attached to a 4/4 body and there's no downside of that randomness, sign me up. Easy first pick, easy A. Slam this in probably every pack it's in, I would take this over a fair bit of removal, I think. Up next is Dwindle. Dwindle is 2 and a blue for an enchantment aura at common. Enchanted creature gets -6, -0. When enchanted creature blocks, destroy it. This is actually really good. -6, -0 will basically shut off everything. Maybe not a 10/10 dinosaur, I guess, in case that would happen to ever be a card. And it gets around the usual problem these cards have of making an infinite blocker by making it only be able to block a single time. We've seen effects like this, -13, -0. And then that creature, if it was a big enough creature, just gets to block forever. But here it gets to block once. This is first pickable. Always play these. Play multiples. Dwindle is great. Solid B. Up next is yet another reprinted counterspell, Essence Scatter. Essence Scatter is 1 and a blue for an instant at common, counter target creature spell. Essence Scatter is actually decent in limited, whereas cancel is hard to keep up with that double blue mana, and even counterspell can sometimes be hard to keep up. Essence Scatter is not as hard to keep up, and unlike negate, it hits the most relevant spell type in limited, creatures. I'm always happy to play an Essence Scatter in most blue decks, even the somewhat aggressive ones. I'm typically happy to have an Essence Scatter because at some point I'm not going to be dropping creatures, or I'm going to have 2 mana left over, and I'm going to get to keep my opponent from having 1 extra attacker or blocker or creature by countering it. In blue-red spells, I'm going to load up on these Essence Scatters. In blue-black control, going to load up on these. Very happy to see Essence Scatter back. I've got it at a C+. That's probably slightly high, but fight me. C+ for Essence Scatter. Up next is Exclusion Mage. Exclusion Mage is 2 and a blue for a creature human wizard at uncommon. It's a 2/2. When Exclusion Mage enters the battlefield, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. This is Mana War. This is the same mana cost, this is the same body, this is almost exactly the same as Mana War. The fact that it isn't just Mana War is a travesty. That card needs a reprint with the weird looking shark art. Yes, it's slightly worse because it only hits opponent's things, so you're not bouncing something of yours, maybe getting rid of a Dwindle on your creature or something like that. But on the upside, you can play this when there's no targets for your opponent and you don't have to bounce something of yours like you do with Mana War. Easy first pick in many packs. I'll take as many of these as I possibly can get my hands on. B+ for Exclusion Mage. Up next is Frilled Sea Serpent. Frilled Sea Serpent is a weird looking fish. It's a 4 blue for a creature serpent at common. It's a 4/6. Pay 5 blue. Frilled Sea Serpent can't be blocked this turn. So for the low investment of only 13 mana, you can deal 4 damage. Woo! Woo. Yeah, I'm not sold on this. It's a 4/6 for 6, which is not something I'm excited by. And that much mana just to get 4 damage in is not enough. I don't think I'll play this often unless the format is either A, the slowest format we've ever seen ever, which I can basically guarantee it's not, or B, really hard blue-black control is very viable, and this card, as bad as it is, could actually be a finisher. If your opponent literally doesn't get to play Magic because you're killing everything, bouncing everything, countering everything, then sure, 4 damage will kill them over 5 turns. D+ though for Frilled Sea Serpent, not a big fan. Up next is Gearsmith Prodigy. Gearsmith Prodigy is a single blue mana for a 1/2 creature human artificer at common. Gearsmith Prodigy gets +1/+0 as long as you control an artifact. So here's another card for the Artifact Matters deck, but it sucks. It's a 1/2 for 1 on the ground. I wasn't happy with a 1/2 flyer for 1. I'm sure as heck not happy for a 1/2 for 1 on the ground. And someday, it gets to be a 2/2. Cut this card, cut it hard, don't play it, D-. Not a good card, Gearsmith Prodigy. Up next is Ghostform. Ghostform is 1 and a blue for a sorcery at common. Up to 2 target creatures can't be blocked this turn. Not a big fan, even at a single mana. I'm just not playing this just to get into creatures. I'll lose to it a couple of times for sure, but this just isn't in any universe worth a card slot. D-, it just doesn't do enough. Not worth a card, D- for Ghostform. Horizon Scholar is up next. Horizon Scholar is 5 and a blue for a creature Sphinx at uncommon. It's a 4/4 flyer. When Horizon Scholar enters the battlefield, scry 2. Horizon Scholar's great. It's 6 mana, sure, but it's a 4/4 flyer, and you get to scry 2. Probably not first pickable unless the pack is bad, but I'd be happy like third picking this. Glad to see the Sphinx back again. It's just really, really, really good. Don't sleep on this even though it's 6 mana. B- for Horizon Scholar. Love Horizon Scholar. Up next is Metamorphic Alteration. Metamorphic Alteration is 1 and a blue for an enchantment aura at rare enchant creature. As Metamorphic Alteration enters the battlefield, choose a creature. Enchanted creature is a copy of the chosen creature. Unlike a clone that we're about to see, I think this one's pretty good. Getting to copy an opponent's creature, should you choose, opens up a lot of doors and can rapidly stabilize a game when you're behind. They've got a game-ending bomb and you don't have much, but suddenly you have the same game-ending bomb. And of course, if you have a game-ending bomb, well, why not have a second one? This is a first pick, but I do think it is in the B tier just because you have to have a creature. This is not a clone. You must have a creature to put this on in order to copy something else. You're not getting back into the game if your board's empty with this, so it is just going to be a B. Just a B. Horrible card if it's given just a B, right? B for Metamorphic Alteration. Up next is Mirror Image. Mirror Image is 2 and a blue for a creature shapeshifter at uncommon. It's a 0/0. You may have Mirror Image enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature you control. This is not clone. Being able to only clone your own things is a real pain because this does not get you back into a game that you're losing that well. And if you've already got a crazy bomb, this is just win more. Unfortunately, this card is swingy because you need to be copying at least a 3-drop for this to not just be awful. I'll keep an eye on it, but I'm going to start this way down at a D+. I don't think this card is good, and I don't think you want to play it. If you have a game-ending bomb, play a better creature, play more removal, play something better than this, because you have to draw, play that game-ending bomb. It has to survive, and then you have to draw and play this in order for it to be a second copy. So D+ for Mirror Image. Metamorphic Alterations is way better. Up next is Mistcaller. Mistcaller is a single blue mana for a creature Merfolk Wizard at rare. It's a 1/1. Sacrifice Mistcaller until end of turn. If a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. This is pure constructed sideboard material. There is the zombie stuff going on in black, but there's not a huge amount of it, and it's not something that you should ever bother playing this card for. Side this in against Reanimator or something in Legacy or Vintage or Cube or whatever, but I don't think you play this in Limited. There's some very minor limited sideboard applications in this set, but I don't. This is never worth taking as a card. I've got it at just an F. I don't think there's any reason to ever play it. Up next is Mystic Archaeologist. Mystic Archaeologist is 1 and a blue for a creature human wizard at rare. It's a 2/1. Pay 3 and a blue. Draw 2 cards. Now this is a mana sink. This is an amazing mana sink. It's a piker that maybe gets in for 2 damage once or maybe twice. And then, if I've got 5 mana kicking around, I just get to draw 2 cards. This is an amazing mana sink. It reminds me of the Mage cycle from M12, the Jade Mage and the other mages that I can't remember. I'll pick this card way too highly, but if it lives, it's just such a solid value engine. And if your opponent kills a 2/1 with a removal spell, you got a removal spell out of them. I'll first pick this, and while it's not a bomb, it is serious value, and I'm going to start very optimistically at a B for Mystic Archaeologist. Up next is Omenspeaker. Omenspeaker is 1 and a blue for a creature human wizard at common. It's a 1/3, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to scry 2. I always like Omenspeaker. It's a 1/3 for 2 that does something decent, unlike some of the 1/3s that we've seen that have lifelink. Whoa. I've always liked Omenspeaker. I'm thinking I'll like her in this set as well. Not the highest pick, but a very solid mid-pack pickup. Works really well in blue-red spells, works in tempo decks and control decks. Basically anything that really, really, really wants that card sort of dig and card filtering. Basically always play it. C+ for Omenspeaker. Omniscience is up next. Omniscience is 7 blue, blue, blue for an enchantment at Mythic. You may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana costs. That doesn't matter. You have 10 mana. What problem do you have casting spells from your hand when you have 10 mana? You're not pulling this off. Save this for Commander or such. Pick it for the value. try to have some fun with it in limited, I guess, but in reality, you're just never casting anything off of this that you weren't just casting by tapping the 10 lands that you have. This does nothing. It's a straight F in limited. Don't ever play this, but you'll probably pick it for value, I suppose. Up next is One with the Machine. One with the Machine is 3 and a blue for a sorcery at rare. Draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost among artifacts you control. This needs to be 3. It needs to be 3 cards, or else you're overpaying for a Divination or something even worse than that. So this is ultimately 100% deck dependent. Obviously, you need to be in artifacts, and you need to have a bunch of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 casting cost artifacts. So I'd hesitate to ever pick this up until I already have the artifacts to power it. So ultimately, I think I'm probably just never going to play it because someone else is going to want to roll the dice on this instead. I'll go with a C-, but if the stars align, it's going to range from like a C+ to a B+, depending on just how many cards you can get off of it. But I'm starting out not picking it, and I'm expecting people to pick it higher than me, and I'll never see it. So C- for One with the Machine. Up next is Patient Rebuilding. Patient Rebuilding is 3 blue for an enchantment at rare. At the beginning of your upkeep, target opponent puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. Then you draw a card for each land card put into that graveyard this way. No. 3 cards a turn is way too slow, does literally nothing until the turn after you play it. It costs 5 mana, it costs a card in your deck. Sure, someone will try to make it work, and sure, it might even be me on stream when I'm really bored and have maybe had a beer or something. But in reality, you should just not be playing this card. It doesn't do enough. There's no mill support in the set. Just don't do it. Straight F for Patient Rebuilding. Up next, if you really want to try Patient Rebuilding, is Psychic Corrosion. Psychic Corrosion is 2 and a blue for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. This is basically Sphinx's Tutelage, if you remember that card from, was it Origins? I'm going to say it was probably in Origins, except there isn't the 5 and a blue draw card mana sink on it. Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of this. Yes, there's clearly an attempt to tempt me specifically into trying out a mill deck in limited, but come on, Patient Rebuilding is a rare. You're not often going to see it. This is an uncommon. You'll probably see 1 in the entire draft. Yes, I know Millstone is in the set, but boy, it's super slow. So I'm out on this. I'm not gonna suggest that you ever really try this. Yes, I'm gonna try it once just for fun. No, I'm not gonna win. So I've got this at an F. There's no fast mill. You know, there's no Tomb Scour. There's no mill the top 5 cards in one go. Mill the top 7 cards in one go. There's no Traumatize, which also isn't that good. So I'm out on this. I've got it at an F. Yes, I want it to be higher. Yes, I want it to work. Yes, I'm going to try it after a beer or two. No, it's not going to be good. Up next is Sai, Master Thopteris. Sai, Master Thopteris is 2 and a blue for a legendary creature, human artificer at rare. He's a 1/4. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Pay 1 and a blue, sacrifice 2 artifacts, draw a card. Yeah, Sai is obviously going to want to be in that artifact deck. He's an artifact payoff for sure. Filling the air with Thopters may be enough to win the game, and if your opponent does have some flying control, throwing them away to find more cards is also pretty solid. It's a first pick build around, though a slightly weak one because you do have to find exactly that one deck. In your run-of-the-mill blue deck, this probably does not do much work at all. It's probably just a 1/4 that maybe makes like what, a Thopter? And then you won't even have 2 artifacts to sack. Yeah, not a big fan of Sai in any deck except the artifact deck, but in that deck, it's going to be like a B. So first pick it, build around it, luck out and draw it when you're already in that blue-white artifacts deck. Otherwise, don't touch it. Up next is Salvager of Secrets. Salvager of Secrets is 3 blue for a creature merfolk wizard at common. It's a 2/2. When Salvager of Secrets enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So I've talked about it. I'm going to talk about it again more in a couple of days. I'm super excited for that blue-red spells deck. But a 5 mana 2/2 to recur a spell? If your spells are insane, this is okay. Like if you have 17 removals, sure. you're going to get a removal back off this. Then that's really good. But if you're recurring combat tricks or something, it's much less good. I could be wrong about this, but it feels like I'd rather just have another spell or another relevant creature than a 5-mana 2/2. I would rather just have another removal spell over this, because then it's the same as if I draw one from my graveyard or if I draw one just off the top of my library. I'd rather have a 2/2 flyer that's going to get in for some damage or something like that. So ultimately, as excited as I am for the deck, and as much as this is clearly meant for that deck, I do think it's like a C-. C- for Salvager of Secrets. Up next is Scholar of Stars. Scholar of Stars is 3 and a blue for a creature, human, artificer at common. It's a 3/2. When Scholar of Stars enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact, draw a card. Having to pay an extra mana for a 3/2 to maybe draw a card if you have an artifact, not a huge fan. In the artifact deck, this is probably just okay. Still dies to a lot of stuff for that 4 mana. So I think I'm putting this at like a C- in the artifact deck, maybe a C in the artifact deck, and in an average blue deck or a blue deck that isn't really playing any artifacts, this is probably just like a D+ unplayable. So C- for Scholar of Stars. Up next is Sift, a reprint from Tempest Stronghold, one of those two sets. Sift is 3 and a blue for a sorcery at uncommon. Draw 3 cards, then discard a card. Not necessarily of those 3, just from your hand in general. I like Sift quite a bit. It's a really good spell, and it's why I was so excited for the blue trial in Amonkhet, which was this spell on the trial enchantment style thing. Unfortunately, Amonkhet was massively hostile to playing something that slow. This set looks to be more friendly to it, and I'd expect Sift to be a relatively high pick and a card every blue deck will be pretty happy with. 3 cards is just a huge amount of card advantage, and throwing away any card in your hand is usually not even slightly a problem. Love Sift, B-. I'll play this constantly until I learn differently. Skilled Animator is up next, also known as, I guess, Walt Disney. Skilled Animator is 2 and a blue for a 1/3 creature, human, artificer at uncommon. When Skilled Animator enters the battlefield, target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 5/5 for as long as Skilled Animator remains on the battlefield. So it's kind of like in Soul Artifact, just a lot easier to remove. Anyways, it's 3 mana. It's way easier to kill than in Soul Artifact ever was. I'm not super sold on it. I'm going to die to a 1/1 Thopter that's suddenly a 5/5 flying Thopter. But in reality, I'm just not too super stoked to play this. I'm sure people will try jamming it in the blue-white Artifacts Matter deck. I'm not sold on it actually working out. It's going to be one of those things where it's going to make some cool stories and suddenly just out of nowhere you're going to be dead to this, but I think there's so many ways of interacting with it. Killing the animator, killing the artifact, bouncing the animator, just there's a lot of ways to deal with it. So I've got Skilled Animator at like a C-. I'll keep an eye on it. It might go up a little bit more, but it's super easy to interact with. So C- for Skilled Animator. Up next is Sleep. Sleep is 2 blue for a sorcery at uncommon. Tap all creatures target player controls. Those creatures don't untap during that player's next untap step. Sleep is super good. Do not sleep on this card. So happy to see a core set with Sleep in it. 4 mana and you get in 2 Alpha Strikes. You get to just tap their team, hit them with your team. They take a turn, they play what? A creature? Good for them. Come back to you, hit them with the team again. It's insane value. This works as a finisher that you can actually use over 2 turns to finish your opponent with, unlike things like Trumpet Blast, which are single use. It's a premium card, should go upwards of first pick in a lot of packs that are lacking true removal. As I said, don't sleep on Sleep. It's great. Solid B for Sleep. Up next is Snapping Drake. Snapping Drake is 3 and a blue for a creature, Drake at common. It's a 3/2 flying. There we go. 4 mana for a 3/2 that flies. That I'm okay with. Of course, we just had this in white as Aven Sentry and Dominaria. It's totally fine. You'll always play the first one, basically always. It's not a premium pick, but it's A-okay. And by A, I mean C. It's C-okay. Snapping Drake. Up next is Supreme Phantom. Supreme Phantom is 1 and a blue for a creature's spirit at rare. It's a 1/3 flyer. Other spirits you control get +1/+1. Woo, a Spirit Lord. Awesome. How many spirits are in the set? Like 2 or 3 other ones? That's it? This is not a supported tribe. Spirits is not a deck. There's just not enough going on here. It's a 1/3 flyer for 2. We've already talked about 1/3 flyers for 2 not really being my favorite thing. Some sets, they're kind of okay. And most sets, they're just not enough of anything. Sided in, I guess, if you're against some 1/1 flyers or 2/2 flyers, because they'll block them pretty well. But otherwise, you probably cut this a lot. So C- for Supreme Phantom. It's going to suck to get this in the rare slot. Spirits just isn't a deck, so I'm not terribly certain why this card's here. The blue horse is next, Surge Mare. Surge Mare is blue for a creature horsefish. At least this one doesn't look like it's flying, like the last horsefish we saw. It's uncommon, it's an 0/5. Surge Mare can't be blocked by green creatures. Whenever Surge Mare deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. How's an 0/5 dealing damage? Well, for 1 and a blue, Surge Mare gets +2, -2 until end of turn. Surge Mare looks pretty decent, to be honest. It reminds me of Frostburn weird. It blocks insanely well. And then when you get a chance, when you get an opening, it attacks like a beast. And it lets you loot when it hits. And randomly, it'll be unblockable because your opponent's green and has green creatures out. Very high pick. Always include this. I think it's a solid B. I think Surge Mare is actually a fantastic card. So straight B for Surge Mare. Up next is Switcheroo. Switcheroo is 4 and a blue for a sorcery at uncommon. Exchange control of 2 target creatures. People love this card. They love to think, ha, I'm going to trade my 1/1 Thopter for your 10/10 dinosaur. It doesn't often happen that well. Frequently, you're looking at a board where you are either super behind and maybe Switcheroo gets you back in if your creatures have survived. If you're ahead, this is garbage. If you're in a board stall, this is garbage because you're switching a stalled creature for a stalled creature. There's just so many situations where this isn't that good. And there are ways of getting blown out. You know, if something gets bounced, the exchange just doesn't happen. Ultimately, I'm going to go with like a C on this. If you are making a bunch of tokens, perhaps Thopters, this probably goes up to like maybe a B-. And I'm talking you are guaranteed to have 5 1/1 Thopters on the field, which is going to be a hard guarantee. Then this could be like a B-. But I'm going to put Switcheroo to C. Don't get too distracted by the best case scenario for Switcheroo because it doesn't often happen. Up next is our blue Planeswalker, Tezzeret Artifice Master. Tezzeret is 3 blue for a legendary Planeswalker. Tezzeret at Mythic starts with 5 loyalty counters. +1, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. 0, draw a card. If you control 3 or more artifacts, draw 2 cards instead. -9, you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your end step, search a library for a permanent card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Tezzeret looks great. Making 1/1s for his +1 will protect himself. It'll power your blue-white artifact plans and power his 0 ability as well. Get yourself 3 Thopters, start drawing 2 cards. Drawing a card for 0 is huge. You get to do that infinitely as long as you can protect Tezzeret. That's amazing. And then if you do manage to get to 9, you can just sack Tezzeret or wait until you get to 10 and then just start blatantly cheating. You just start flipping your deck over, picking the best card you want and popping it down on the battlefield for free. That's dumb. Tezzeret looks fantastic. Slam dunk A+. I want to open Tezzeret and play Tezzeret real bad. Tolarian Scholar is back from Dominaria. Tolarian Scholar is 2 and a blue for a creature human wizard at common. It's a 2/3 and that's it. I wasn't a big fan of this card when it had a fully supported tribe. In this set, it is literally just a vanilla 2/3 that doesn't matter at all. Wizard doesn't matter. Human doesn't matter. So this is garbage. This is a D+ at absolute best. This is the, oh god, I need a creature. Something went really wrong with my draft or my sealed pool. Do everything in your power to not main deck this card. D+ for Tolarian Scholar. Fibblethip is back with Totally Lost. Totally Lost is 4 and a blue for an instant at common. Put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. At instant speed, this is pretty darn good. It's obviously one more mana than Griptide, which is the same effect, and sure, we would love to have Griptide instead of this, but we have Totally Lost, and Totally Lost is totally fine. It's like a B-, as long as you are not some sort of low-curve aggro deck, which I don't really think blue is all about these days, or at least not in this set. There's no, turn 3 Adelies screwing stuff up. So this is a B-. I'm happy to always play one Totally Lost. Being 5 mana, the second one's a bit of a hard sell, whereas I would always play the second Griptide. So B- for Totally Lost. Just don't load up on them, but I'm happy to see it back. Uncomfortable Chill is up next. Uncomfortable Chill is 2 and a blue for an instant at common, and it does not tap creatures and your opponents can't untap them, which this card sounds exactly like it should do. Instead, creatures your opponents control get -2/-0 until end of turn, draw a card. It's like a bad fog, although we will talk about a bad fog in a few days. -2 just is not enough of effect, even though it goes across the entire team and even though it draws a card. I will never play this card as long as I can handle it. If I'm in the blue-red spells deck and I didn't quite load up on enough burn or other better stuff, maybe I can put this in just because it's a spell, but in any other case you should be cutting this. D- for Uncomfortable Chill. Up next, our second last card in blue is Wall of Mist. Wall of Mist is 1 and a blue for an 0/5 creature wall, and of course, because it's a wall, it has Defender, meaning that it cannot attack, but luckily it can block, of course. It's an 0/5 for 2. That's gonna block. If you want to reach the late game, this is a way for you to reach the late game. It doesn't fly, despite Mist usually being relatively highish in the sky, but it blocks basically everything on the ground for at least the first 3 or 4, maybe even 5 turns. 90% of decks don't want this, but if you are late game control, here you go. If you're up against aggro that you can't quite handle, feel free to side this in. So D+ for this. It goes in extremely specific decks and generally should just live in the sideboard. And our final card for blue is Windreader Sphinx. Windreader Sphinx is 5 blue for a creature Sphinx at rare. It's a 3/7 with flying. Whenever a creature with flying attacks, you may draw a card. 7 mana is a very tall ask. It is a 3/7, so it's not dying in combat, most likely. Plus, it draws a card when it attacks, or when any of your other flyers attack, which will help you close out the game a little bit quicker. All told, though, that 7 is such a tall ask that ultimately I think that keeps Windreader Sphinx from being a real bomber all-star at all. And I think it's a card that you so reliably have to cut that it's probably a C-, except for those few times where it's actually a B. In probably a blue-black control deck where you know that you're going to hit turn 6 and your opponent's going to have an empty board because you have killed everything and countered everything, and then a 3/7. It's still going to take some time to finish this game, but I've got a really beefy creature. So I think you do have to cut this a lot, so I think it is realistically like a C- for Windreader Sphinx. So that's going to wrap it up for blue. Blue looks really good. There's some great cards in there. Ignoring my absolute love for the blue-red spells deck that I'm going to draft every time I can, we have really solid cards like Metamorphic Alterations and Mystic Archaeologist and Exclusion Mage. I think blue is going to be a pretty good color in this set. It's missing kind of the bomby game ender stuff outside of maybe like Gin of Wishes, so you're probably going to have to pair it with another color, but I think it's going to pair very, very, very well. Anyways, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you want to talk to me about these cards, you want to talk to each other about the cards, use those comments down below. You can also find me on Twitter at the Mana Leek. That's LEEK, like the vegetable, not the card. You can find me at facebook.com/manaleek, twitch.tv/manaleek, and patreon.com/manaleek. If you like the content, click that thumbs up button, click subscribe if you want to see more, and if you do have questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all tomorrow for the Black Set review.